Okay, so my name is Yingzhen, and I'm now finishing my PhD at the University of Cambridge. So today I'm going to tell you about our recent work on gradient estimator for implicit models. So this is a joint work with my awesome supervisor, Rich Tana, and I also want to express my gratitude to Chang Liu, which is kind of like many inspiration for this work is coming from him. So also this work is based on, this presentation is based on my draft thesis, chapter 5 and 6, if you want to check it out. And now let's go to the story. So I hope here all people do Bayesian inference. And usually when we say doing Bayesian inference, we are interested in integrating out the unobserved variables in your model. For example, if you have a generative model, then maybe you are interested in integrating out the latent variables. If you are doing Bayesian neural nets, then we are interested in integrating out the weight matrices. So here we are all here for approximate inference, and we basically say we do approximate inference because exact inference basically integrating all the random variables is important. And I want to start this talk by inviting you to think about this question. So what does trainability really mean for an approximate inference algorithm? I will spend like 10 minutes talking about this thing, and I hope this can trigger discussion. So if you have any ideas, definitely let me know. So just to set up the background, this is Bayesian inference 101. So you have this Bayes rule, which is basically computed by having your prior distribution P of Z, your likelihood P of X given Z, and then divided by the marginal distribution P of X. And then once you obtain this exact posterior P of Z given X, inference is done by computing the expectation of some function Fz of your interest. So let me give you two examples. So for example, if you are interested in computing the predictive distribution of your Bayesian neural net, then basically this Fz function is the conditional distribution of your label given the your input and also Z, which is your weight matrix. Or if you are interested in computing the exact posterior, then basically the F function is the delta function. So in this talk, I'm going to assume that this F function is easy to compute, otherwise we need more approximation techniques. So let's look at approximate inference, because we know that in many cases the exact posterior is intrainable. So in approximate inference, we usually find Q of Z given X in some family Q, such that Q of Z given X is approximately equal to the posterior. And then after we obtain this approximate posterior in inference time, well, we can approximate the expectation, and nowadays people tend to, extend this thing to multi-color approximation, which means you take samples from Q of Z given X, and then you compute the empirical average of the function F given the samples. Okay, so in this kind of multi-color approximation setup, the trainability of approximate inference basically says that because I already assume that F of Z is easy to compute, even in Z. So once you can obtain samples from Q in a fast way, then computing this empirical average will be straightforward. Let's look at one example. So Bayesian inference is very popular. I think it's here around 20 years. So Bayesian inference basically says that how should I obtain this Q distribution? So they try to minimize the KL divergence between the approximate posterior Q and the exact posterior P. And then you can basically trigger one about the algebra and then show that it is equivalent to the maximization problem of the Bayesian bound, or sometimes called elbow. So, nowadays we are using Bayesian inference for many complicated models like Bayesian autoencoder Bayesian neural nets, which means the exact elbow is intrainable again. But fortunately, we can also do this in multi-color approximation by, say, sampling from the Q distribution and then compute a multi-color estimate of your elbow. And then we can proceed to optimization, and then again, once the optimization is done, we can sample from Q and then compute the empirical average of the F function, which means you can do this approximate inference. So now let's look at the trainability requirement of Bayesian inference. So, as I said before, you can, if you can sample from Q in a very fast way, then you can do the inference. But if you look at Bayesian inference, it also has another requirement, which is basically the fast density evaluation, or at least the fast evaluation of the log of the gradient of the log density. So why this happens? Because if you look at the, say, the multi-color approximation to the Bayesian log, this means you need to evaluate log Q. Or if you're plugging this into a gradient-based optimization procedure, you need to be able to evaluate the gradient of log Q. And you see that this is only for optimization. So after you've done this optimization, for the inference task, which is basically computing the improvement average, you never compute the log density or the gradient of the log density. So you can see, pretty much see kind of this kind of gap between inference time stuff and also optimization. Let me try to give you 3 reasons that why I think evaluating the approximate posterior density might be not necessary. So first, let's say if you actually want to evaluate the posterior density. So this means in approximate inference setup, you probably be restricted to use simple distribution. For example, in the 90s, we use Gaussians. Or right now, we use kind of like neural network parameterized Gaussians. Or like neural network parameterized normalizing flows, which, and in those cases, you often start from very, very simple, very simple irreducible transformations and then stack it up. And usually you need to stack a lot of layers. So this means, well, when you can compute the density, but the evaluating density is slow. And second, if again, saying that you want to evaluate the posterior density, visualizing the approximate posterior density in high dimension is still a very challenging problem. So first, you can definitely say, I want to plot the, say, the marginal distribution in 2 dimensions. However, single mode in, say, marginal distribution doesn't really mean, say, single mode in the joint space. And if you want to visualize, say, marginal distributions, you can either plot density, or I think in the MCMC community, they're basically trying to plot samples and then feed density estimators. So in that sense, you need to get samples, and maybe you can basically feed another density estimator later. But most importantly, here we call the task, which is basically computing the expectation of f, and we approximate it with Monte Carlo methods. And here you see that the Monte Carlo integration methods doesn't really require density evaluation. So observing this, I came to interested in these kind of questions about a year ago. So the question I want to address is basically this. So can we design the efficient approximate inference algorithms which enable fast inference without adding more requirements to Q? So what I mean here is that I want to train a Q distribution which we can take sample from in a very fast way, but I don't really want to say restrict the Q distribution to satisfy other constraints like evaluating density. So why this research problem is interesting to me? So there are 2 points. First, it can have the kind of good balance between MCMC and BI, Bayesian inference. And I will also show you that this research also allows exciting new applications. So let me give you a quick comparison between the traditional Bayesian inference methods and also MCMC. So here I basically highlight the advantages and disadvantages of both, in different color codings, and you can pretty much see that the disadvantage of one side is pretty much the advantage of the other side. So let's go through it. So Bayesian inference, you need to do density evaluation or gradient evaluations because you need that in optimization procedure. But MCMC, you just need to say simulate the random walk according to the transition kernel. And Bayesian inference, because we use pretty restrictive Q distributions, it is less accurate than MCMC. However, if you want a very accurate MCMC method, you actually need to simulate the Markov chain for a very long time, which means MCMC is slower than Bayesian inference. And another big advantage for Bayesian inference, which is very fascinating especially for deep learning people, is that Bayesian inference is easy to amortize. So in the kind of Bayesian autoencoder setup, you basically want to train a recognition network that basically maps your observation X to the the approximate posterior distribution of your latent variable Z. However, it's not very clear to us how you can amortize MCMC. Although we have some work on that, I'm not going to talk about this one. So essentially, I'm basically trying to explore this kind of research region that I just mentioned before, in the sense that I want to basically exploit the best from both worlds. I want to train a Q distribution that is kind of like more accurate than traditional Bayesian inference method, but still faster than MCMC. And I also want to emphasize this kind of inference, this kind of approximate distribution as well. So another application now I'm very excited about is doing meta-learning for approximate inference. So if you think about, say meta-learning, which is basically like learning algorithms on data. Now people do the whole things like for optimization, for reinforcement learning, but not many people are doing this thing for approximate inference, because I think approximate inference here you actually requires to design a very carefully designed algorithm, like hand-producing MCMC, to make sure that your algorithm will converge to the exact posterior. However, if we allow to use internal densities, and then I think we can definitely try to say design approximate inference algorithms by doing some meta-learning stuff. I will show you one experiment at the end. So I think this research regime is quite new, starting from last year. I just give you some references that happened starting from last NIPS to now. It's kind of like in 1 year. So I've seen, say, 4 different types of methods, like say using GANs to do density ratio estimation for the Bayesian lower bound, or using some alternative objective function that minimizes KL divergence, or emphasize either MCMC or another deterministic dynamics called staying Bayesian gradient descent. So today I'm going to briefly mention to you one of the work we've done for this task, which is doing a gradient approximation to the Bayesian lower bound. Okay, so let's go back to the Bayesian lower bound. So in this case, I'm assuming that Z is a continuous variable, and I assume that you can do a representation trick, which means sampling Z from your Q distribution is equivalent to first sample a noise epsilon, and then pass it through a neural net. So you can write down the Bayesian lower bound, but here I'm basically writing down in another form, separating the log joint distribution and the entropy. So if you use Adam or Allegret to optimize your Bayesian lower bound, this means you only care about gradient. And here I just basically write down the gradient of the Bayesian lower bound. It has 2 terms. I basically first write down the gradient for the log joint. And if I assume that this log joint is trainable, I will assume that in the rest of the talk. Then basically means you have the chain rule for this, and you can compute the gradient for the first term. So now let's look at the gradient of the entropy. You can spend some time to work on the algebra, but basically the gradient of the entropy term has 2 terms. First is kind of like the path gradient, and the second is kind of like this expectation of the score function, which has expectation 0. And I think there is a NIPS paper this year mentioning that you should definitely know this term. So because we can do representation, and you can assume that you can compute the gradient of your parameters with respect to your transformation f. So this means if you can approximate the gradient of Z for log Q, well, you should sometimes also call score function as well. If you can approximate this score function, then you can basically plug in your approximation to this equation, and then basically have your approximate gradient, and then plug into your algorithm. And in this case, I actually want to obtain an approximation to this score function in a cheap way. I don't want to do double loop. I mean, there are some methods that tells you can optimize, say, one method called noise and autoencoders, and at optimum, you can do some algebra to show that when you have injected noise that is infinitely small, then you can recover this score function. However, that requires another inner loop for optimization, which can be slow, because here, in this case, you actually need to optimize Q. Once you change the Q, you need to train your noise and autoencoder again. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to actually obtain an analytical solution, or analytical approximation to this score function. So this brings me to kernel methods. So let's think about a very naive case. So let's say you can sample from Q, and then you can feed a kernel density estimator to the Q distribution. And then once you fit that, you can use that as an approximation to your Q distribution, and then compute the gradient of that. So this is very naive. However, I would argue that this is not very accurate. So first, it is not solving the question directly. It is still trying to fit density and then fit the gradient which can be inaccurate. I'm showing you here a graph here. So, and this method is very sensitive to, say, the bandwidth of the RBF kernel, and you can basically see that a good density fit, well, if you don't regularize that in a smoothness way, can actually give you very diverse gradient. So I don't want to do this kind of, say, gradient fitting in an indirect way, so I will show you the second method. So this idea says that I want to minimize the expected L2 error of the gradient fit, so I use G hat as the approximate gradient of my score function, and then you see this kind of expected L2 error under the distribution cube. So if you expand this square term and then use a trick called integration by parts, which is in your college calculus book, then you can basically show that you can rewrite this L2 error into this form. So why this is nice? Because you know that we can't evaluate the score function, and we can't even get a noisy estimate of that. So this means the first objective function is intractable. However, if you use integration by parts, in this case, you only need to evaluate the approximation G hat and the gradient of G hat. You don't actually need to evaluate the score function itself, and then you can still do the optimization to obtain the approximate gradient. So there are two papers, from the kernel methods community, basically using these ideas to say I want to use a kernel machine for the approximate gradient G hat. And then I will plug in this kernel machine into the second line objective function and then fit the coefficient A by minimizing this objective function. So this is another method. I'm going to tell you the method that we proposed. So it is also based on the observation for integration by parts. So if you assume, okay, let's say you have a test function which I call H. And then if you assume this boundary condition, then you can pretty much use the same idea as to derive the previous equation, which is integration by part, to show that this identity is true. So this identity is called Slank's identity. And you see that this Slank identity, here you have the test function h, which we assume we can evaluate, and then you have this score function. So our idea here is super simple. So we think if we can invert this Slank's identity, then we can basically obtain an approximation to the score function. So let me just quickly show you how we do it. Remember, the idea is to inverse Slank's identity. So first, we can't compute expectation, but we can compute multi-color estimate. So this is the idea. I obtain samples from here, and then I write down the multi-color version of this Slank's identity, which means you have this kind of say sum of the h times the score term, and then you have the right-hand side the average of the gradient, and then you have some error term which is introduced by multi-color error. And then now I'm going to rewrite the function a little bit. So I'm going to pack all the kind of the h function into a matrix. I'm going to also pack the kind of score function into a matrix. Then you can basically figure out the matrix algebra telling you that this is a linear equation. This is a linear equation in terms of the big matrix G, which contains the score you care about on the samples. So now you can basically, we are very good at solving linear equations, solving linear regression problems, and now this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to solve a regression problem because here in this case, I only take samples and we do have multi-color error. I'm going to add a regularizer, L2 non-regularizer, which gives me a ridge regression problem. So we all know ridge regression. We can basically work out the equation for the ridge regression, which gives you the estimator. So here you can basically see that the ridge regression equation here requires the H transpose H, which means you just need to be able to evaluate this H transpose H matrix that gives you a kernel matrix. We never evaluate the function H in practice. We only evaluate kernel matrix. And you don't actually need to remember this equation because I will tell you a kind of a nice connection to kernel density estimation methods. So if you use translation invariant kernels, then by some algebra again, you can basically rewrite the kernel density estimate of the gradient in the matrix form in this way. And then you can basically see that the difference between these two estimators is only about the preconditioning matrix. And here I'm going to argue that our Slank's gradient estimator will be better. Because if you look at the gradient for the log Q at the samples Sk, then you will see that the KD estimator only uses the kernel similarity between Sk and other data points. However, the stance method also uses all the other similarities for even for the data points that has nothing to do with Sk. So this means we can use more information to estimate the gradient, then we can be more sample efficient. Another comparison to the score matching estimator can be a little bit more complicated. So first I will tell you that the score matching estimator here, the expected L2 error is also called Fisher divergence, which is a stronger divergence than the kernelized static discrepancy that is at the actual discrepancy the static gradient estimator is minimizing. So in this sense, minimizing the L2 error could potentially give you more accurate things. However, if you remember the previous kind of equation I showed you, it also includes the gradient of G hat. This means you actually need to propose a parametric approximation to the G hat, and indeed, these kind of kernel methods people use kernel machines. And in this case, you are kind of restrict your approximation into a kind of a parametric family which introduces approximation error. However, if you look at our solution, which is basically just solving linear regression problems, you will see that we are only estimating the function value at the samples we are interested in, which means this is a non-parametric estimator. So you can see combining these kinds of divergence, strongness of divergence or parametric approximation. So I mean, at least right now it's hard for me to tell which one will be a better gradient estimator in general. However, there is actually a very good advantage for the standard gradient estimator compared to score matching one, because if you remember the linear regression equation, it is only one solution for all the kernels you can plug in. However, for the score matching estimator, I actually to derive pages of equations to actually solve the linear coefficient. So I need to do that repeatedly for different kernels. I've done that for RBF, I've done that for Cauchy kernels. Each of them takes 2 or 3 pages. And you can imagine that in many kind of practical cases, you actually need to use a mixture of kernels. And if you use this kind of the score matching methods to derive the the coefficient for a mixture of kernels, it can be horrible. So I mentioned to use some kind of exciting new applications which is doing mathematical approximate inference. I'm going to highlight this experiment. We have more experiments in the paper. So in this case, I'm interested in learning an approximate sampler. I'm not going to claim that this is an exact sampler, but I'm going to use some similar ideas as in the optimization community that I'm going to parameterize the stochastic dynamics by neural nets. So here you can take in the current location of your parameter and the gradient at the current location, the stochastic estimation of the gradient for the log joint here, and then you plug in that to a neural net, and the neural net will output you the next output of your neural parameters. So the training objective for this one here, I basically use a sum of variable lower bound. I mean, you need to use sum of variable lower bounds, because if you only use sum of the the log joints, then basically you are ignoring the entropy term, and then you will end up optimizing. You will end up learning an optimizer instead of a sampler. So I'm trying to see whether this idea can train an approximate sampler to generalize to different architectures. So in this case, my training task is basically on this kind of UCI prep data set, and I use a 1 hidden layer Bayesian neural net with 20 hidden units and a radial activation. And my test subtle will be on other UCI data sets, but with a bigger Bayesian neural net and a different activation function. So here's the result. So first I'm going to say I haven't shown you the score matching estimated results. I have that result in the appendix. In this case, it didn't work. We tried very hard. But here I'm showing you the result for, say, the method using KD gradient estimator, the standard gradient estimator, and the baseline, which is the SGLD. We know this is a sample. This is a very good sample if you actually use very small sample size. And I'm also comparing you here the MAP solution. The MAP one is basically just an optimizer. So you can basically see that here the MAP method did work very well because it is a optimizer instead of a sampler. And the KDE method was okay, but it is worse than the SGLD method. This experiment is quite toy. We haven't seen kind of like significant improvement of the approximate sampler, but you do see that it is having close or even slightly better performance than the SGLD. So this tells us it is definitely a promising direction to actually say train an approximate sampler or even train a SGN-CMC method structure. So train the preconditional matrix and the diffusion matrix of your SGN-CMC. So just to quickly summary. So in this talk, I've covered you the motivation of this research, why this is interesting, and I've asked the question that is sensitive evaluation really necessary for inference tasks or not. So I show you some methods that people have developed, and in particular, I tell you one of the methods that we developed for approximating the gradient of the variational bounds. And here I haven't actually told you another big challenge, which is designing implicit posterior distributions. Well, I mean, in theory, you can actually say, okay, I'm going to rely on the result that the neural network are kind of very good functional approximators, and then just plug in a neural network and hope it will work. But in practice, there are a lot of, say, this kind of optimization problems, instability problems. We don't really understand neural networks. So I think at this stage, it is still important to think about how you can design the implicit posterior distribution. So this is, so thanks for your attention, and if you are here for tomorrow's basic deep learning workshop, I will show you how to use this method to train implicit generative models. Thank you.
So we're doing a little bit bad on time, so one question only, please.
Yeah, so basically the new sampler or approximate sampler that you proposed, can you tell us a little bit about that? It looked like the noise distribution was spatially dependent or kind of spatially varying. Is that true?
Okay, I think this is one of the limitations for this method. So because we actually want to generalize these kind of stage samplers to different dimensions. So you see, we train on a smaller network, and then we generalize it into a bigger network. So in this case, I'm only parameterize the network in a coordinate-wise fashion, which means the neural network will take in a coordinate of the neural network parameters in, and then outputs that coordinate. So this means I haven't actually considered the correlation between the coordinates of the parameters. I think this is definitely one big issue for either this method and also many of the, say, methodology for optimization research right now, and we are thinking about ways to address it.
Okay, thank you again.